welcome to another installment of Fragments of Silicon Reviews. Last review session for the calendar year. So 4 games up this time to close things out. The first of which is Blender Bros. So Blender Bros takes us to a heretofore uncovered system when it comes to retro games brought to modernity. That is the Game Boy Advance. Seriously, I don't think we've covered a Game Boy Advance game.
Certainly not in a retro capacity, and
yeah.
Honestly, as an SNES kid, there is a little part of me that hurts slightly every time someone talks about that generation of games as retro, but I can't really deny it at this point.
No, considering that, the Game Boy Advance came out in 2001.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, they discontinued it around 2005, 6?
A little later than that. I mean, I think we had games coming out like as late as 2007, 2008.
We're still basically nearing the 20th year of it not being a thing. So yeah, it's definitely right.
Yeah. I mean, the Game Boy Advance's heyday is generally considered to be 2001 to 2004. With the release of the DS. Though the DS didn't quite strangle the Game Boy Advance that fast.
Yeah, because
we were still getting
DS can still play Game Boy games. Well, it may.
Yeah, and we were still getting quality releases like Drill Dozer came out in 2006.
Mm-hmm. But this game is from 2002, so
yes, yes it is, and it is a original product on the Game Boy Advance, which was kind of a rarity for third parties. Hint. The Game Boy line, portables in general, but especially like the Game Boy Advance and the DS, were just the fucking dumping zone for absolute trashed licensed games. You pick a licensed product,
or even just super downscaled version of other franchise games. Like they did some horrific things to Donkey Kong Country to get it to be able to be used in 4-bit or 2-bit color and ridiculously small screen size.
Yeah, I remember. It's also not helpful, and this is something we were talking about in the setup, because this is also a 2002 GBA title, which means
is before they had that is a period that is, from my experience, before they'd figured out what the Game Boy Advance was really good at, and we're still playing around a lot with what it's technically capable of.
Yes, and right here we're already seeing the problems with this game that aren't
the character sprites, and a lot of the other graphics look kind of 3D pre-rendered in a way that is, I guess, technically impressive to be able to do on a handheld, but also doesn't really look as good as well-constructed pixel art.
True, but that's kind of besides the bigger issues. And this isn't necessarily any, how do I put this, fault, except what is inherent to what's going on here. That is to say, this is a GBA game. This was a game designed for a very small screen. And it was designed for a screen that wasn't backlit. So we got the twin problems of this game looks pretty ugly. And not just because of the pre-rendered sprites, but because we are blowing up a game that wasn't designed for it.
Yeah, and everything that isn't the characters you're playing as looks a little washed out, but what that means is one of two things. it either means that they had actually gotten the developers had actually gotten hands-on experience with the actual hardware before they released it, or they had gotten it was late enough. The year in between the system launch and this was enough for them to have gotten the advice that the screen isn't backlit and is therefore quite dark. Because trust me, on the original hardware, a washed out background like this on the Game Boy Advance was a feature, not a bug.
Indeed.
Because it made it possible to distinguish your player character from the background.
Yep. And it's not like I said, that's something that really dates this game to like 2002, maybe 2003.
Yeah, to the pre-SP period.
Yeah. Well, it's also, keep in mind this is a third-party game. Nintendo knew the limitations of the original GBA screen, which is why even like Super Mario Advance, a launch title, had this kind of very bright pastel color palette and washed out background look to it.
Mm-hmm. The insistence on using the higher resolution graphics just because you can, even though they don't look good, is more of a third party thing.
Yeah. So, yeah, Petty, you're going to want to do that spring move here, which is kind of hard to pull off.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's an emulation issue or if you got to throw that to the button.
That's what constitutes. I already died.
Oh. Well,
but there certainly were plenty of actually it's just clunky platformers.
Yeah. Yeah. You still got to hit the button you got to throw the red ball.
He's making his way back to it where I am. So.
Yeah. I know. I'm informing him how to solve the puzzle. But that is what constitutes a puzzle in this game. It's not exactly a brain teaser, but it is more than just going left to right. Now, it's also worth noting that I'm not exactly sure who developed this game. It says Hudson on Wikipedia, but I don't think that's right. This doesn't really come across as a Japanese platformer. It comes across as a European-developed platformer. And one of the big giveaways there is the level design. This isn't Japanese-level game design. This is European-level design here.
It doesn't look that much like that.
Well, it's keep in mind, we're talking the constraints of the Game Boy Advance. But... there's a lot more verticality going on here than what you find in a typical Japanese-developed platform. Whereas if you play a European platformer, trust me, they love things vertical and sprawling. This is just the Game Boy Advance version of that.
Okay, so the game that this reminds me of the most is another Hudson Soft published Game Boy Advance game, the launch game Pinobi Wings of Adventure, which I only know of because it's one that I had. They share the kind of... It just seems like a little bit... In that one, you're a bee and you can kind of fly around, but it definitely feels a little similar to me.
That is certainly possible.
Though that one was developed by Artoon, which is Japanese, so...
Yeah. I'm like I said, it could be a co-production. I couldn't say. Like I said, it just... In terms of actual design, this comes across as more a Western, specifically European platformer. Not just in terms of its design, but in terms of its playability, because it's a bit jank.
Well, if it was developed by Infogrames, which I know technically stopped existing around that time. that is European.
Yes. But, it's, that's not a flaw of the game. It's more just how it is. Like, if you're expecting a more typical left to right affair, which was in no short supply on the Game Boy Advance.
Looking at you, Sonic
this
fan.
is actually a bit of yeah, this is actually a bit of breath of fresh air. Once again, though, this is maybe not necessarily constrained, but it is sized to the Game Boy Advance. See, that's a key difference between this and I honestly thought this at first glance this was a Super Nintendo game, from some unknown developer like Plock or Artie Lightfoot, that got re-released.
Yeah, some canceled affair that finally saw the light of day.
But the fact that it's a Game Boy Advance original platforming means we avoid one of the principal problems with such games. That is screen crunch.
Yeah, the Game Boy Advance was actually had a landscape format screen approximately.
I mean, the screen real estate here isn't great, but that's more due to Blender's big ass sprite here.
Yeah, and it would have been a lot worse if it was like 2/3 as wide and the same height.
Yeah, but that was another mistake that kept being done on the Portal platform. It's like, we need to make this big ass sprite without really taking into account the actual screen real estate of a portable system.
Yeah, I kind of understand the thought process of, well, the screen is small, so you need to be able to see the guy you're moving around on it. But that neglects the screen is small. You need to be able to see where you're jumping to.
Yeah. So while we don't get screen crunch here, even in blown up form, the game looks kind of claustrophobic, doesn't it?
A little bit.
Yeah. Now, in terms of play control, actual moveset, fairly varied. Augmented with these things, these creatures called mini bros that you find through the levels. Kind of the big collectible. I'm not sure. And you can usually find them by using your ear antennae.
Yeah, I mean, you seem to have the usual suite of approximately animally thematic, cute platformer guy moves.
Yeah. You got his main attack is the spin. Now with this particular mini bro, you can charge up and have it do a distance attack. Like the other mini bro I found was a helpful swimmer.
The one I have now is healing.
Right. And we've also seen the spring move. There's also the drill move, which is done by hitting the other button. It's listed for the Game Boy Advance A and B. Keep in mind how the actual controller setup with the emulator isn't necessarily going to be A and B by default. And it's all pretty typical platformy stuff here. Petty's fighting a boss here, and he's dying a bit, but it's one of those things that gets better with practice and learning the pattern recognition. Now, after this world, the game starts opening up into non-linearity. I'm not sure why they did that. Did the selection that way, but see right here, you've got 3 new worlds to explore.
I guess because you can, but
yeah. And yet here's all the shop. Yeah, there are also multiplayer mini games. Yeah, obviously I did not get the chance to try those. Mainly because this is a emulated Game Boy Advance game, and there's no way to get multiplayer features going on here. You need something like the Nintendo Switch Online to really make that a thing. And we're talking about like mini games. Also, apparently, there are some driving pseudo 3D driving segments later on in the game. I will admit, I did not get that far in this particular title.
Again, because the hardware is technically capable of it.
Yeah, and
I'm aware of the the GBA era driving games. Those were things.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and as I brought up in the Spider-Man games retrospective, there was a real desire to get 3D working on the Game Boy Advance. It's actually an impressive for the system kind of feat, like when it worked right or worked at all, which sometimes it didn't.
Yeah.
Anyway, what is it? Overall, this game is fine. Nothing amazing, but nothing I could say broken. Yeah, I just really, it's so okay, it's average. It's one of those games.
It has not made me want to hurt someone, therefore it is fine.
Yeah, it's not bad. It's just you really need it to be something fairly special to really make a lasting mark in that genre.
Especially on the Game Boy Advance, where you're dealing with Nintendo, you're dealing with you're dealing with the Marios, you're dealing with Metroid, Yoshi.
Sega at this point on the 2D, speedy 2D platformer front now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, this game came out the same year as Sonic Advance, and so on and so forth. Like I said, once again, in terms of like Game Boy Advance software, you could do so much worse.
I've played so much worse, yes.
Like I would I would put this above, say, pretty much anything licensed on the GBA. Like if you want to see how bad it can get, go look up some of the, just an example, a SpongeBob game for the GBA. They were pretty ratty.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also, I can completely see why this game got lost in the mix. Like, Blender Brothers isn't even like a cult hit or a hidden gem. Like, it's not one of these games that has a dedicated following. I mean, I guess statistically there are probably a few people who look highly on this game or fondly, nostalgically. But it's different than, say, Sigma Star Saga, or Riviera.
At least Sigma Star Saga had a gimmick.
Yeah, you get my point, though.
Mm-hmm. The gimmick being, oh hey, it's like an RPG, except for instead of random menu-based battles, you have random space shooter segments. Like literally, as the random battle, it does the diddly 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 diddly, but instead of going to a menu screen for a battle, it literally goes to a short space shooter segment, because that's how the alien technology works. They have random fucking beam up a soldier on the planet to shoot stuff, spacecraft in orbit.
Yeah. Anyway, in terms of the sound design here, it's also not anything overly impressive, but it's good, especially for the Game Boy Advance, which is, I will say the Game Boy Advance's sound capabilities get a bit maligned, but that's mainly because of so many Super Nintendo ports. But the Game Boy Advance sound trip absolutely mangled pretty much anything that came from the Super Nintendo.
Yeah, just because the part of the thing is to get the cost down is to use a shittier sound chip.
Well, it's also because the Super Nintendo had a custom Sony sound chip, which obviously didn't get used in the Game Boy Advance. And yes, I will also concede that when it mangled hard. Like Final Fantasy IV's Game Boy Advance soundtrack is a crime against music.
Yeah.
But,
also some of the Mario Advance.
Yeah, Mega Man. Like Mega Man and Bass. Like
Mega Man and Bass version Screen Crunch, yeah.
Some of the Sonic stuff wasn't so bad, but that's actually, new music made for it, not, rehashing the Genesis stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Though, except for the Sonic Genesis, there's a special pit in hell for that.
Yeah. Anyway, like I said, this is a flat out 5 out of 10. In real terms, it's not going to last you all that long because, once again, it's a Game Boy Advance game targeted towards kids. You've seen Petty complete some of the levels. They're really short. And even though this game touts like 7 worlds, they're not going to be all that, difficult or...
You'll probably be done with this in a couple hours.
Yeah. Anyway, in terms of pricing, so this game clocks in at $10.99. I will flat out say that is too expensive for this game. I mean, yes, I know this game would have clocked in at like, say, $30 on the Game Boy Advance.
Oh yeah, this definitely would have been a AA release on the GBA.
Yeah. I'm like, well, it's like we're not talking about the Game Boy Advance release. We are talking about, the emulated Steam version. And I think this game is about worth $5.
Yeah, I'm looking at the GBA. If you want the physical cart, it's 50 something. So if you really want to play this game, go grab the Steam version.
Mm-hmm. And keep in mind, you could, the Steam Deck is a thing.
Yeah.
So if you really want to emulate that Game Boy Advance,
portability
screen size, that screen size better than a full-blown desktop or even laptop display. That's probably the way to go. I mean, it's not perfect.
And
because
say Pico's actually using a decent scaler this time, because some of their emulation releases, I don't know what scaler they've been using, but it is awful. But this one seems to be perfectly fine.
Yeah, I think perfectly fine sums up Blender Bros. Anyway, so anything more to comment on this game?
Nope.
All right, then. So, yeah, that'll about do it for Blender Brothers here. So be sure to tune in after the break, as Petty Fan will be reviewing Kalanur. I think that's how that's pronounced. Yeah, we're going to go with Kalanur.